The very existence of something like Stranger Things feels like a timely response to a shared obsession that consumers have had lately with everything 80s. We cannot seem to escape this decade for some reason, and it just continues to influence so much of our current music, movies, and video games. And in terms of film lately, I'd like to think that its revisit to 80s style horror specifically has been the most charming. We've seen this recently with movies like The Guest, You're Next, and It Follows, all of which seemed absolutely hell-bent on reminding us of what horror was at least kind of like in the 80s. Practical effects, corny dialogue, blood and gore, but probably most important of all, amazing synth music.
This way.
There's just nothing quite like it, and no way we'll ever be able to fully recreate it. That is, of course, unless you happen to be one of the Duffer Brothers, the creators behind this show, because nostalgia here just seems to be the seminal thrust behind every little thing that they do. I guess the question at the end of the day is, does that really amount to interesting and original storytelling? Things start off pretty familiar. Our setting is a small town, this time in Indiana by the name of Hawkins, where its police chief at one point remarks that the most dangerous thing to ever occur here was when an owl mistakenly assumed that someone's hair was a nest and tried to attack it. All of that quickly changes though when a young kid by the name of Will Byers suddenly disappears without any logical explanation. Once Byers is out of the picture, our attention shifts to those closest to him and stays there for the rest of the season. Some worth mentioning are his mother, played by Winona Ryder, his three closest friends, the city police chief, and a mysterious girl who seems to have escaped from some unspecified, but most likely nefarious facility of some sort just on the outskirts of town. And it's this mysterious location that then operates as our show's primary catalyst for all its complications and inexplicable phenomena. Now, I know you've heard countless comparisons to movies like The Goonies, E.T., or It, and that's for good reason, because Stranger Things is unquestionably influenced by all of those. But I would take it even one step further and posit that the entire thing, to me at least, just feels like a revisit to 80s horror in a sense. Maybe with a little coming-of-age sentiment in the form of Stand By Me, perhaps. Man, that crying scene was fucking awkward. Thematically speaking, world builders like Ray Bradbury and Stephen King are all over this thing, with hints of classics like Something Wicked This Way Comes and The October Country lightly peppered all throughout the story. But despite the kid-friendliness of some of those influences, I still felt like I was led to believe that Stranger Things was going to be a bit more sinister and darker, and that's where the first couple episodes kind of let me down. I know it's not exactly always fair to compare what you watch to what you may have been expecting, but sometimes you just can't help it because of the way something had been advertised. Or maybe I just misinterpreted or even overinterpreted the initial trailers for this show. I don't know, but my point is that the first couple episodes here, out of which there are only 8, just didn't really thrill me quite as much as I was expecting them to. I'm not going to say that you can necessarily play these things on the Disney Channel or some shit, but I still was expecting something a little bit darker than what I initially got. Also thought that a lot of it was a bit too familiar, as if it were struggling to pick which of its influences it wanted to be an exact copy of. One of my friends even mentioned how that if he wanted to watch something for the sake of nostalgia, he'd just put on E.T., or practically any of the other influential films behind Stranger Things. So no need for this show then, right? Well, not exactly, because despite maybe just a couple of underwhelming episodes, and some cliched story elements here and there, and also a mildly annoying performance from Winona Ryder. Other than that shit, and I know I've been talking a lot of shit so far, but other than that, I think Stranger Things is actually mostly an enormous success precisely because of its brilliant reimagining of 80s stylistics. And, in my opinion, passes the difficult test of feeling simultaneously vintage and original, which seems to be its ultimate intention anyway. Stranger Things is an example of a show that, while story-driven, isn't afraid to also emphasize form and style. and it does a pretty slick job of this with its use of a brilliant soundtrack, eerie atmosphere, special effects, and its uncanny ability to recapture that feeling so many of us had when we were little while sitting in front of that TV set on a Friday night with our friends, eating pizza and watching that R-rated horror movie we somehow talked our parents into renting for us from Blockbuster. That feeling right there for me is the essence of this show, and probably the main reason why the Duffer Brothers set out to make this thing in the first place. Some of my fondest childhood memories emanate from those experiences I had with my friends while exploring our neighborhood at night with flashlights and walkie-talkies, or just staying up late watching horror movies or playing games. And to be reminded of all those things and once again immersed into them with such heart and sincerity is really satisfying. The Duffer Brothers seem to be trying to remind us of something that we just so easily forget as adults, which is basically just how thin the line between imagination and reality really is for a child, and once was for all of us. So many of your experiences at that young age are just bristling with wonder and curiosity. Our minds make so much of our reality, especially when we're young. And if you were anything like me or the kids in this show when you were young, which is to say kind of geeky, then reality was simply nothing more than a stepping stone or a nexus into another dimension that you and your friends just created in your heads. And I'm really excited to go deeper into this other dimension we've been calling the Upside Down. I want Season 2 to take me further down that rabbit hole because I need some really freaky shit this time around, and I want it to get a little more cerebral, with the hopes that the Duffer Brothers will also find some really creative ways to expand on some of the supernatural concepts they hinted at in this season. So even if I can't tell you that I am as deeply in love with Stranger Things in the way that some others are, I can still confidently say that I'm certainly a believer in this show, and that I really enjoyed most of what Season 1 had to offer. The soundtrack here by Survive is brilliant, and the kid actors are outstanding, and above all, I just appreciate how sincerely the show has been able to recreate an era that many of us of a certain age will probably never be able to completely move on from.